Welcome, everyone. The Albuquerque Bernalillo County Government Commission meeting will come to order. Commissioner Smith will be joining us during the meeting via telephone during the voting on the behavioral health items. Councillor Harris and Commissioner Maggie Hart-Stebbins are excused. And now we will have a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner O'Malley.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Malley. So we have a new person representing the mayor's office here. I'd like to welcome Dr. Carol Piercy, Director of Family and Community Services here this evening. Would you like to say a few words?
Yes, I would. Well, thank you so much. Oops. Thank you. And thank you, Councilor Pena. I'm really delighted here to be representing the city, delighted to be the new Director of Family and Community Services with the city, and just really excited about our collaboration since I've been in this position about 5 months working with the county. It's the county, the city together. That's how we really make some great things happen in our community. So I'm really delighted to be appointed to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. So next item is 2, approval of the minutes. Are there any changes to the May 24th meeting minutes? If not, do I have a motion?
So moved.
There's a motion and a second to approve the May 24th meeting minutes. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion passes. Next item is 3, public comment. We have no one signed up to speak during public comment. Come on, somebody out there. No. Next item is item 4A, a presentation by Danette Townsend regarding the ABC Community Schools, and Commissioner Quesada.
Thank you so much. And this is something that we felt that was important to the city and the county, and the community school model is very impressive. You know, as I sat on the APS school board, you know, we saw the data that came in, and Atrisco Heritage is probably, the data that comes out of Atrisco Heritage is very, you know, motivating and impressive on how that model works. And it's funny because we talk about how we think this is a new model, but it's actually the old way, how schools used to work, and we've lost our way. And so Danette now is in charge of getting us back on our way, and they're doing really great work, and I thought it would be a great presentation for us to hear. So, Ms. Townsend.
Thank you. I'm going to try to be really, really concise for you today, so I appreciate you allowing us to be here. So community schools are really the road less traveled, right? It's a new way of doing things the old way, and they've been around since the 30s. And former Councilor Garduno will tell you all about that he was in a community school when he was in elementary school. So the ABC Community School Partnership really believes that all students will graduate ready for college, career, and life. And generally what we say is there anyone that argues with that should be our goal for all of our students, and we don't get a lot of pushback on that one. The partnership itself is a joint powers agreement between the city, the county, and APS. United Way, UNM, and the Hispano Chamber are also represented on the board. And the beautiful thing about our board is that really everyone puts principles above personality. We do not have to go through a lot of challenges to get people on the same page when it comes to ABC, and it's been an incredible blessing. I've been involved with ABC since 2006. Before it was a joint powers agreement, I was on the board with Julie Baca back in the day, and eventually went to working with the school district and with the Elevate Initiative and back with ABC. So I have a lot of history and watching that really grow. The bottom line is that ABC really works to remove barriers to learning. What we are looking at doing is leveraging systems and their resources rather than individual partners, although we do a lot of that, but ABC as a board is really looking at their own systems and how we can better use our resources together. Developing and providing tools and training and technical assistance to grow community schools in our community. A lot of what the ABC team does is go out and develop The tools based on what the field is saying, and then the training to go with those tools, and the technical assistance to help them keep it moving forward. The removing of the systemic barriers, which have been really critical. Sometimes in giant agencies, giant bureaucracies, it can become hard to move things because we have a lot of process. And the ABC board really focuses on helping to remove those barriers through the City Council, the County Commission, and the APS School Board. We really want to look at how we leverage what we have in the community, as well as how we braid our funding together, which is one of the biggest efforts. So we joke around that you have to kind of put your credit card away because you can't really take full credit for anything in a community school because everyone is contributing to the success. And that includes braiding the funding together, which also requires our elected officials on the board to help us move those barriers, because traditionally, that's not the way we spend money. We want to see very clean-cut lines about whose dollar touched what, did what, and in a community school, we have to move that in a different direction. So in a community school, there are 4 pillars that we look at. Last year, some evidence came out. We had a research document that came out. They looked at 143 different initiatives and identified what worked in those initiatives and came out with 4 things. One is expanded learning programs. That can be anything outside of the core instruction, whatever that looks like, where people, families, children are learning. The second is integrated supports to students. That is all of the basic needs, whether it's Medicaid, access to healthcare, dental, behavioral health, basic needs as far as keeping the lights on at home. Do we need to have a food pantry in a school, things like that. Anything that falls into that, really, that bottom rung of Maslow. Authentic family and community engagement. It's a critical cornerstone of community schools, and when we focus on the word authentic, because not only does it mean having families and community engaged, it means they're at the table with an equal say, and action is taken based on what they say. Often we can bring a lot of people to the table, and we don't always move on what they've told us. We, of course, have certain restrictions because we're in schools. But when we say authentic, we're looking at how do you ask people what they want and then help them get that? And how do we look at where families want to be and help them get to that place, not where we think they need to be, and use those as points of entry to then eventually move that school forward. And one thing I did forget to say is you should have folders, and each of these slides are in those folders, as well as a couple handouts that I'll reference in a little bit. The most important part of the framework is collaborative leadership. And collaborative leadership there's 3 parts to that. One is a collaborative leader that is leading that school. And that is a principal of the school, that academic leader who takes the time and effort and risk to truly share their leadership in that school. We know that principals are the sole responsibility holder. If something goes wrong, it's going to be them that gets held accountable. So these principals have to be willing to risk that and to pair with a community school coordinator. That coordinator is truly responsible for all things non-core instruction. They're coordinating the services in all these pillars. They're looking at the data. They're assessing that data. They're gathering that data from families and students. And they're looking at what needs to change in that school. Every school could look different, but they all have the same framework. The last part of that is the Community School Council. That is a group of people that are stakeholders in that school community, and when I say school community, I mean that geographic area around that school, as well as the students and families that access that school and the people that work in that school. They all come together, they meet on a regular basis, generally every other week, look at data, look at what's happening, look at where the gaps in service might be, look at where the needs are, and they make decisions based on that to align all of the resources in one common direction and looking at one common result. So we have a saying that says if you've seen one community school, you've seen one community school, because every single one will be based on what that community needs. Where the coordinator is concerned, the entities that are on our board resource a lot of community school coordinators. Every coordinator is basically paid by almost the city, the county, or APS. We just finished a study that will be coming out in about a month. The formal part of that study will be coming out in about a month on the return on investment of a coordinator dollar. For every single dollar we invested, we got a $7.29 return into that school with leveraged resources. That's in alignment with other national studies that range from $1 to $10 and $1 to $14 back east. It is critical. We can't do this work without them, and they bring the dollars to the table that schools would not have access to, whether it's through community partnerships or through actual money. So I want to give you a real quick lowdown on the process. Why is a community school different than a traditional school? We do the work differently. So in this particular example, and you have a legal size paper in your folder that goes through this, we look at data. In this particular example, we worked at Los Padillas Life Center and Los Padillas Elementary School. There was a need that was semi-identified there that said grandparents are raising their kids and they don't have custody and they need help. We went back to the Community School Initiative grant from last year, which is the city funding that comes to that ABC helps manage. And it said 70% of the people in our school are grandparents raising grandchildren. So we went out, we engaged the Office of Social Services from the county and some of their public health folks they were working with. They surveyed the community, the school. We worked together with them to survey their school community and found out, yes, this is true, and people wanted legal help. Roll that up a little bit, brought some partners to the table, had a pop-up legal clinic. That pop-up legal clinic ended up serving 27 families. 26 of those were actually there for custody issues. 5 of them are now being represented by the UNM Law Clinic that helped with the pop-up clinic in court to help actually get guardianship papers so that they can truly have custody of their grandchildren. We looked at this, saw there was still a need. We're having another one on November 11th, and I got notes right before I came here from a meeting. It's going to target anyone who is raising children who are not their own. We now have Judge Levy, the Law Clinic, Pegasus, and a whole bunch of basic needs providers that are going to be participating. They're going to be running 2 tracks. One will be those that need to really start either the caregiver affidavit or kinship. They want to go into the kinship, actually going through that process. The other will be you go to that room, then you can go to the other room and get Medicaid, sign up for all of the services that you might have access to. From there on November 8th, we're going to be having another clinic that we gather all of the information for those that really want to have guardianship, because it's a very long process. Less than 50% of people that start that process actually complete it because it's so cumbersome. We have Judge Levy, who is on board 100%, has now presented to the rest of the family law judges to look at something. Apparently there's a $200 fee to post in the journal, Albuquerque Journal, to say you're going to adopt a child, right? So it's a huge barrier to our families. She's got almost every judge on board. Final meeting is Monday to say they'll accept, it's another newspaper and I don't know the name of it, but for $85 instead. One of the law clinic lawyers that helps run the law clinic said this is physically putting food on people's tables because they do not have to choose from the safety of their child or putting food on the table just by making this happen. And it happened because of the way community schools operate, the way we leverage partnerships. The city, the county, APS, other community partners like Pegasus are all at the table doing this now. And that's just one example of how the process works. That's how it's different. In a traditional school, they would have said, here's a referral, and that's what they would have the resources to do. It looks different in a community school. These are our schools. There's going to be about 31 schools this school year. I can answer any questions about those in a bit. This is what the funding is looking like in FY19. Majority of this funding is new funding. Outside of the EMSI money, these have all come up, including the big blue bar is really EMSI for the most part, with the addition of $50,000 for Homework Diner. But pretty much new money other than that, and as you can see, there's every entity. The other is private foundations and nonprofits that are contributing to one of those 2 categories. It's the breakdown. About 16% goes to ABC infrastructure. The rest is data and development, and 82% is going directly to services, either through coordination or direct service. Really, together we can change education. That's the bottom line. If we all work together going in the same direction, we can change the outcomes for our community, and that is what we're looking to do. We can give parents access to the lives they see for themselves, not the ones we see for them. That's it.
Any questions? Commissioner O'Malley, then Counselor Sanchez, and then Dr. Pierce.
Thank you. And I have not been on the Board of Community Schools, so please bear with me. I have a few questions. So looking at the budget for FY19, coordination, when we look at coordination, is that administration and the coordinators?
That
What
is
is
the actual dollars going to salaries to pay for community school coordinators. The majority of that is all ABC brokers it. We go out, try to get people to commit the money, and then it goes directly to APS for the most part because they employ most of the coordinators.
Okay. So in this case, so when you talk about program services, those are direct services? Okay, so I was just looking at the city and the county in their, their breakdown. So is administration, I mean, part of the coordination? Is that part of that?
The ABC infrastructure is what's going to the actual ABC team that oversees all of this. So each entity contributes $50,000 to the ED salary and development. So funds to do things to help hold trainings and things like that is what comes out of that, as well as the county supports the positions that work on the ABC team, which are 3 full-time positions and 1 part-time that are staff members, and then 1 administrative assistant.
That's part of the 16% here?
Correct.
Okay, and then just one final question here. So when you mentioned systemic challenge, systemic barriers, is this one of the systemic barriers in terms of is that your example, or?
So that's not really a barrier per se. I mean, it kind of is, because it took the process to get everyone together, but it's not that people are actively putting up barriers, it's just that we tend to operate in silos.
Okay, so what is an example of a systemic barrier?
I would say hiring processes through the district that take a long time, or the county or the city, we all have our process. But getting folks together, an example of one that took place was the Pajarito Mesa Community Center out there. It took all 3 entities coming together to move things within 6 weeks, to get a portable placed out there, to get utilities hooked up, to get a program, get a grant to a program provider so they could open up a child care program there. That's the type of things, and when we say barriers, that typically would have taken at least a year. And it took 6 weeks because everyone was working together and the right people were saying, we want to see this move. Whereas otherwise, it may have taken about a year to make that happen.
So I noticed, I was looking at the school list,
I know.
and I noticed that, well, there's one in.
There's one in yours.
Well, so how are the schools determined to be community schools?
So there's a couple different things. In the beginning, it was really those schools who really wanted it and had a passion for it. And so we looked at, did they want to become a community school and what type of resources were available? Because this is also not something we're trying to dump a ton of money into. We're trying to use what we have and use it differently and more
So
effectively.
people asked to be
People
community?
asked. We assessed too. We also did an assessment about kind of low-hanging
Okay.
fruit. In Zone 1 and Zone 2 through APS, which is the Southeast Heights and the southwest side of town, both of those associate superintendents have declared that all schools in their zones will become community schools, so they actively are working towards that with ABC. In the Northeast Heights and the North Valley, there isn't quite the interest yet. We did just apply jointly for a grant to the federal government with APS to increase, to have 4 schools in Zone 4. And that's somewhat based on data too. I mean, we want to go where the most vulnerable are. We also utilize the strategies through the CSI application process, so we oversee the programmatic side of that from the city money, and we try to get that into schools so that they're at least practicing some of the strategies, like bringing people together to decide what kind of after-school programs students and families want, where the past practice had been, what do teachers want to teach? And so we try to move that.
At this point, though, your budget is basically aligned with how many schools you serve, so
Yes.
I guess if you were looking at additional schools, then
We would
you'd
need
have
more
to
money.
increase your budget. So you're saying, though, that some schools just have not had any interest in becoming a community school?
Correct.
Okay,
And I don't know
thank
that
you.
they're barriers to becoming community schools, it's just that some are really actively chasing us down.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just want to thank Commission Chairman Stephen Michael Quesada, who is working on the APS school board. The latest community school is on Albuquerque's west side. It's Tres Volcanes Community School. So that just recently opened up this school year. I think it's going to be a great attribute to the west side, and we're always dealing with overcrowding in our schools on Albuquerque's west side. Some of the elementary schools have over 1,000 kids, and I know when he was working on the APS school board that he was, watching that very carefully, and I want to give him a lot of the credit for the new community school opening up. I'm a little bit disappointed, though, that the principal did not want to have a grand opening for the community school when the community wanted to be involved, especially bringing the kids into the brand-new school. So I've talked to the board members, Candy Patterson and Peggy Muller-Aragon, to talk to the principal, because the community's asking me, when are they going to have the grand opening? This is a $50 million school for Albuquerque's west side, so hopefully that community school will have a grand opening. But Commissioner, thank you very much for your work.
Thank you.
Dr. Pierce.
Thank you, Chairman Pena. Danette, I'm a big community schools fan. I think it's one of the really bright shining pieces we have as a collaboration between the county, the city, APS, UNM. I've been involved for quite some time and watched it grow, and I'm really excited. Danette, can you, I know there's been added funding, can you talk about how many more schools are served this year over last year, or what's been, if the program's deepened with the added funding, a little perspective on that?
There's a couple. We had about 25 schools last year. We have 31 this year. Part of that is because the city moved $181,000 out of the EMSI budget into coordination that we were able to leverage with APS dollars. By the money going directly to APS, they can match it with Title I dollars to expand the schools. There's $94,500 going into direct services to fund a middle school soccer league. We have a partnership with the New Mexico Youth Soccer Association. They wrote a grant last year. We helped them, ABC, APS helped them produce a grant that was funded to get more kids involved in soccer. The city matched that grant this year, so now all of our middle schools can play, 36 kids per school, boys and girls teams, and it will be at no cost to the students. Last year was $30 a player. They had about an $85,000 grant to help with buses and all of those things, so that's been phenomenal. Our first meeting is next Friday, I believe, with all of the coaches. And then there's an additional funding going into the out-of-school time money as well. It's about $15,000 when we break it all out with that. So it's a total of $1.3 million that's going to APS from the city through EMSI.
So then with that added funding with soccer, all middle schools will have soccer
We'll be a little over
available
1,000 students.
at no charge to students. Great. Thank you. And thank you, Danette. I wanted to just say, again, love the partnership, and to just highlight that community council piece that I think is so important, is where our business community comes into play. And I've seen how that, because the way we'll raise the tide for all of our children and families is when our business community is there, along with the city and the county and our educators. And I think it's just a great model, and I'm very appreciative of you and the leadership and how this is working.
And us, of you. Thank you.
Counselor Benton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think in the very embryonic stages of the community schools effort, I was the council's representative, along with Councilor Winter back at that time, of course. But it's nice to see how far you've come, and I, of course, it's been a long time since I was doing that, so some people would say it's taking too long, but I say I'm glad to see where we are today. I love to hear the point about the grandparents. That's something that we all know. We all know that that's happening, but how do we really bring those folks who are taking on such a responsibility, and as said here on the flyer, with no legal decision-making ability, but they're taking a huge responsibility, and how we bring them in. And then I really like what I'm seeing here about the process being very data-driven. And that's getting to be a cliche at this point, but it's good. It's a good cliche, because we need to know what we're really talking about here, and really, data leads to understanding, leads to analyzing that data, and leads to making strategies, and then leads to be able to assess whether you got a good outcome or not. So I really like what I'm seeing here, and
Thank you.
Again, yeah, thanks to Commissioner Quesada for bringing this before the board, and have an opportunity for the general public to hear what's been going on, so.
We also have some coordinators here who we've been with all day doing trainings and things.
Great.
The rest
Well,
would another training, or they would be here as well.
I like what I'm seeing, and I guess Commissioner O'Malley and I are going to have to go out and beat the bushes and recruit more near North Valley schools. All right.
We'll get them.
All right.
People they don't want to ignore success, so we'll.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
before we end the presentation, I just want to ask one question. Did I hear you right? Did you say 70% of the students are being raised by their grandparents? at
That is what
Los
Los Pedias, that's what their data said on the surveys. Now, at the time, Los Pedias had 193 students too. So it's not a huge, the percentage is high, the actual number of folks isn't real high. But I will say with the process of this legal clinic, they just had their open house, and for the first time in like 5 years, they had 293 people show up to their open house. The last 5 years, it's been between 60 and 80 tops. We're also seeing that at John Adams. They had 1,400 people at their open house at John Adams the other night. So the folks are,
I know who
they're
runs that show.
right. That's
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it does seem to be a case when we checked with Pegasus and also with the UNM Law Clinic, they're seeing the same thing. What they are also saying though is they really wanted to focus on anyone raising someone else's children because they're seeing a lot of siblings in their 20s taking on infants of parents who are incarcerated.
Thank you. And then just one last thing, I'd love to see last year's data, so maybe if you can come back and provide that for us at another time, I would really appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay.
Got it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for all your work.
Thank you.
Where are we now? So next item is 5 old business, staff update on adding APS board member on ABCGC.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm over here, Stephanie.
I'm sorry, Stephanie. I was actually looking in the audience for Dr. Piercy because I was told he may be in attendance, but, okay. It looks like we have a representative who, I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Scott Elder, I'm the Chief Operations Officer for the district.
Okay, thank you. So we do have someone. So go ahead, Steph.
Yes, Madam Chair and members of the Commission, I'll just give you a quick update on the intergovernmental agreement. Much appreciation to Ms. Baca, the Commission Administrator, for getting the draft ready. So far, it's been reviewed by County Legal Team and APS Legal. They had a few minor changes that they suggested. I wanted the draft of the IJA is in your packet, and on page 2, I just want to mention that, so as written, the IJA will add 2 members to this commission from APS. And as far as non-procedural voting, the draft you have in your packet lists that the quorum for the majority for vote on non-procedural items would require 3 votes from the county, 3 votes from the city, and 2 from APS. However, that means that's an even number. So the number of votes from APS was changed to 1 so that we have an odd number. I can stand for questions. Otherwise, the next step will be to finalize the IJA, get the city's legal team to review it, and then once it's ready, the county will send the IJA to the commission, to the county commission, and then the city will send, along with an enabling resolution, through the city council for approval.
Commissioner O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the resolution says 2 people from APS? Is that what it says? Why are we having 2 people from APS? Somebody must come up with that idea.
Madam Chair, Commissioner O'Malley, so the membership is adding 2 members from APS. The reason for that is so that the number of total members of this commission would be also an odd number. Otherwise, we would have an even number, which could lead to, voting issues if there
Okay,
wasn't a quorum.
I was just wondering about that because actually this body is just a recommendation. It just makes recommendations, so it doesn't actually, you know, I mean, to the prospective body. So I guess I don't know, I didn't see the reason for it not to be, but okay. I
Yes,
mean, I'll have that question later, but.
yes, Madam Chair and Commissioner O'Malley, just want to mention also that non-procedural items that this commission actually takes action on may not necessarily involve APS. For example, this behavioral health collaborative.
Right.
So that's something that you all will have to maybe think about and discuss.
Councillor Benton.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And yeah, I think I briefly touched upon that the last meeting, that because we have this sort of big, I don't know, whatever, big task before us, which is the Behavioral Health Initiative, and because there was a lot of debate about the Behavioral Health Initiative and how it would be governed, at least in the interim, it was decided after considerable discussion that this would be the body that would kind of be the public face and the of that initiative. So that certainly is something I'm very interested that we be able to work out. It's not that not to say at all that these issues do not involve APS, but all of the programs and everything that we're talking about allocating are not allocated by APS, but rather by the city and the county. So. Thank you.
Any other questions, Dr. Pierce? No? Mr. Elder, just want to welcome you and ask you to come up and say a few words if you're interested. And you're interested.
I'm sorry. Chair, Madam Chair and members of the commission, no, we just want to say thank you. We appreciated the offer. Board Member Pierce, he couldn't make it tonight. We have a grand opening of one of our buildings up in his area, and he couldn't make it. He wanted to make sure somebody was here, so I came to listen. But I just wanted to let you know we did appreciate this offer, and we're very excited about the collaboration. I think it'll really help moving forward some of the major projects. I'm excited as the COO, so thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Quesada.
Madam Chair, and I know that we're probably gonna discuss the two members, but I believe that APS is such a huge entity. We can argue probably if they're the largest government entity in Bernalillo County. And I would like to have, and I'm hoping that you would have somebody that was more on the capital side of education. So when we're making decisions through either the Bernalillo County or the city on infrastructure and those sorts of things. And then you also have a member that is more based on education. So when we're talking about community schools or initiatives that we're trying to push forward, you would think that they would have, that kind of collaboration with this commission. And so for me, it makes sense to have that kind of representation. And that was the whole purpose of trying to bring them to this commission, because there's such a large group and we make so many decisions, and yet we're so separate. So as sitting in the school board, people would come up to us and say, well, this is happening in the city. And we're like, well, how come nobody asked us? And nobody even asked a question. So we can ask those questions here, even though that as bodies, as we go back to either our council or our commission and we make final decisions there, at least we know that we've had input from either both sides or and that we're trying to make the right decisions for the community as the community grows or as the community changes. So I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in on why I thought maybe there was going to be 2 from APS. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? No. So I think we're just going to continue the dialogue. I agree with Commissioner Quesada. I think it's just important, talking to members of APS board and leadership, is that APS is one of the largest mental health providers in the city of Albuquerque in terms of our students. So, I think however it pans out in terms of the dialogue and their voting ability, I think it's important to have their voice at the table. So thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. So next item is 5B, Continuing Behavioral Health Initiative Actions and Discussions, Status Update and Direction Going Forward. Katrina Holtram.
Good evening. So again, we're just up here to update what's been going on in the world of behavioral health, which there's been a lot going on. First, I'd like to announce that we just completed our training for new orientation on phase 2 of our project, and we have new subcommittee members who are here tonight. For the new subcommittee members, an existing wave, say hello. We do have some of them, which we'll be confirming tonight as well. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about phase 2. Many of you know that we have spent a lot of money already, and we have earmarked a lot of money for the Behavioral Health Initiative, and that, in order to get projects started, is where we wanted to go. And we were dealing a lot with proposals and getting things vetted. Now we're in the process of actually doing some evaluation. And so that's kind of where we're moving into now. UNM-ISR, the University of New Mexico Institute for Social Research, has actually been going out and evaluating some of the programs. One of the first programs that they're in the middle of evaluating is our Community Connections program. So we'll be getting that information out to you soon as we talk to our committee members about that. So we're vetting our projects, and we're making sure that we are making sound decisions, and then giving our subcommittees the information on what the progress needs to be made and wanting that input. That's really what phase 2 is about. We still have projects to vet. We still have a little more money to spend, and we'll talk about some of those projects and that money overall. And the other piece, the last piece I really want to talk to you about today is really our crisis system and what we want to do in terms of Bernalillo County and the City of Albuquerque and the partnership that we're doing in terms of crisis and crisis response. Most of you know about our mobile crisis teams, and we have been out both with the city and the county, APD, and the Sheriff's Department. I will have those numbers to you shortly at the next meeting, but what we're seeing, our preliminary results are showing that we have an 80% diversion rate, which we think is huge success from the emergency room or from the detention center. So we're able to handle those crises at the homes or at the address where they are, and we're able to stabilize that client, get them services, and do some follow-up. So we think that that's great. That's part of that crisis continuum. Now, we still have the issue of individuals going to the emergency room in order to get their help, and so we're looking at how do we expand and develop other resources, such as like an urgent care for mental health, and how do we do that, especially in the areas of need, so the Deep South Valley, which don't seem to have a lot of those resources, and what do we do into Harris, and in those areas where they're coming into Albuquerque to get those services anyway. So one of the things that we've done is reach out to First Choice and ask them about the possibility of expanding some of those services on that behavioral health end, although they didn't think that we had the resources right now to do an actual urgent care. We talked about something called a living room model, which is basically a drop-in center that is peer-run, peer-led, that would stabilize the individual. And then we will be working with the University of New Mexico Hospital shortly to see if we can have a telehealth component in case that person needs their medications refilled in order to stabilize individuals, so that we now can have another option besides an emergency room. So in addition to that, we always ask, and we're always challenged by Hyde & Associates with what next. So they go to the emergency room, now what? You know, did they go home? Were they stable? They went to an urgent care, now what? And there is a population that would benefit after they go to an emergency room from continued stabilization inpatient. So these are the types of clients that don't meet that emergency room or hospitalization criteria. These are the ones that we hear about quite a bit, that go into the emergency room. There's no harm to self or others, so they're cleared quickly by the emergency room or PES. And then it seems like while the police officer is driving off, the client is walking out. And so we want to be able to provide a voluntary service for that stabilization to occur, so that clients have the option maybe not to stay in a hospital because they don't meet that medical criteria, but be able to go to an inpatient residential type stabilization place for a period of time in order for us to link with services and figure out the what next. So we're trying to build out that component as well. And then finally, we are working with the University of New Mexico Hospital and having discussions with them about what medically can they help us with on the campus over at MATS, our Metropolitan Assessment and Treatment Services. So what can they do? What sort of service can we provide that we're already not providing to the community that would be a help to the hospitals and also be a help to that what next that we're talking about? Looking more at beyond addiction, but also how do we incorporate that mental health component right there on that campus, knowing that we need a little more medically managed model than what we have now, which we're totally a social model. And finally, the last phase is really building out a new building for the University Hospital that would be the crisis stabilization unit. So we're just in discussions now, but I wanted to give you all an update about how we're progressing with this and what we're trying to do between UNM and Bernalillo County. And I know that Councilman Benton also wanted an update on our website. So as we know, we've been plagued with stop and go on website. So we had a web page for a bit, an independent web page with Share New Mexico. We recently passed, as you remember, Bridging to Wellness, and that was our initiative to really engage the community and let them know what the city and the county and UNM are doing in terms of behavioral health, where you access services. It's really the behavioral health initiative. And so what you're going to see in the near future is an independent web page design that is going to have all of that information on it, and so it's going to be easily accessible to the public. So we're working on that piece as well, and actually have some money to fund it now. So.
Thanks, Ms. Holtram. Sounds good about the website. Glad to
Great.
hear about that. Yeah, websites, like, they're so spectacular, and there are these geniuses that are creating them, and then sometimes I feel like our website is not just the behavioral health, but other governmental websites are kind of look old and tired, and they're not always user-friendly. So we had a couple of complaints about that. Is the only reason I brought it up. But you went with us and Director Pierce and others to the to visit San Antonio, and I just wanted to hear kind of your take on that. So much discussion about homelessness these days, and we know that a very large percentage of the homeless population is suffering in some way from behavioral health disorders, or, but at the same time, that's a tiny population compared to the overall need for behavioral health of people who are housed and who do have a home or a family or somebody who's that we hope is caring for them, but they're at the very least have a roof over their heads. What were your takeaways from that and that whole intersection between what we're doing with the behavioral health initiative and what we're trying to tackle with homelessness? And we just passed, everybody knows, I guess, by now that the council the other night passed the single site, the first of the single site models, I hope, that this body approved a while back, and that's been a priority of the initiative. Not the top priority, but a very important priority of the initiative to have supportive housing. So what was your takeaway from that trip and what we heard?
Well, Madam Chair, Councilman Benton, it was a great trip. I think we've learned a lot. And I think what we've learned is a 24-hour shelter may be beneficial for at least for a period of time in Bernalillo County. I think what we already know, not even going on that trip, is homelessness is a huge issue in Bernalillo County. And intersecting with that may or may not be chronic behavioral health issues such as substance use issues as well as mental health. And where that intersects, we have got to start looking and addressing those problems. But that's what we've been doing all along. So if you remember at the very beginning of this initiative, part of our traction that we had to gain was what populations are we going to serve? So, 17 million, as you know, doesn't go a long way. So we're really targeting on many of these fronts the chronic individuals that are going in and out of the emergency room that have behavioral health issues, and chronic individuals that go in and out of MDC that have behavioral health issues. Those are the ones that we're trying to capture on our very first tier. And certainly they intersect at some point with homelessness, and Dr. Pierce and I have had conversations about how we work together and what populations to serve first and how to do that. But it's a very complicated problem. The good news is, I think we have many of the components that San Antonio has, the San Antonio model has. It just isn't in, on 10 acres or however big that is. But I think that we can make a lot of things work in terms of the services that are existing and already out there and the linkages that we can put together.
Yeah.
So I felt hopeful after all of that, and those were the takeaways. Because for me, we need to really work on permanent supportive housing, but in the continuum of everything that we've talked about, there's transitional living, there's scattered site housing, and then there's a single site model. And that's what we've held true in the Behavioral Health Initiative. And so we're looking at all those different components, because there's not just one silver bullet that's going to fix this problem. We need a variety of options that include housing and different types of treatments or supports in these various models. I hope that helps.
Yeah, Madam Chair, it does, and I agree. I think this back door, if you will, of the process of treatment, and when we do get somebody stabilized, how do we get them housed, and not have them drop off the radar screen again, which is the challenge that happens with maybe certainly I would say an overdependence on a scattered site kind of approach right now that's just it's a placeholder in our system now, but yeah, I think as a community, one big takeaway was I felt better about what we're doing here, at least on the back door part of it. So it's sort of like they're very much robust in the front door, and if we can get that part worked out, I think we've got a pretty good way out for people to reintegrate into society with some help.
Agreed. Madam Chair, I still believe in the entire continuum. You're going to need scattered site because you've got individuals who are more independent.
Sure.
You've got, and I invite you all to come over to Matt's, not only to visit our dog Chance, but also to come and see the facility and some of the things that we have there, because there's been questions about whether or not transitional living is successful, and we believe that transitional living with supports are successful for a certain population who are more independent, and they don't need that long-term housing. They need a leg up, which is something that we're going to talk a little bit more about tonight in terms of what you're voting on. But we believe scattered site is a component to that, because you want to put individuals in the most least restrictive setting that we possibly can and let them live their lives and integrate into the community in a very meaningful way. And then single site, are for these individuals who want to, but need more support than what we're able to offer in those scattered sites. So I believe that this continuum still holds firm for us, and I don't think any one of them is going away. I think the problem is going to get bigger, because I think as we have these options, we're going to see kind of where people fit into the scale, and people need supportive housing, and in various degrees. So. But I was hopeful. I think we've got a lot of components we can just kind of wrap up and start tying together.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I know that we've had a lot of discussion about the triage center, and I know that you've reached out to the city, reached out to the UNM, you've reached out to different partners, and I think there's a lot of frustration, right, that something hasn't really come to fruition. But I think also we have to realize that, maybe you can't get everybody at the table, but we have to proceed, right? So I'm glad to hear that you're looking at it. It's a big challenge because, as was mentioned, then we have folks who, don't have homes and that need these services, and then we have people whose children are in crisis or they have those episodes and they need stabilization, and it can't just be a few days. They have to have the opportunity to be there longer, and so it's very frustrating, especially for parents who have children who are mentally ill, who have behavioral health problems. So that's a really big challenge. And I think it's important too to reiterate that, in terms of the issue with people who, and quite frankly, are near homeless, becoming homeless, couch surfing, whatever you got, there's a big problem out there, and it really has to do with, I keep saying, it has to do with the fact that wages have not kept up with housing. People are really a paycheck away in a lot of ways from homelessness. Fortunately, some people have family that they can stay with in the interim and that sort of thing, but a lot of people don't. So there isn't this one-size-fits-all kind of thing, I think, and that we have to look at very successful, best practices and incorporate those. And that was a good example, I think, of, which is why we were supportive of the site downtown, which I know there was a lot of pushback on, but it looks like we're going to move forward with that. So, and that was based on a very successful model. So that's kind of where we need to go. But anyway, we've talked about how we move forward with the bigger plan, which is what we're talking about. It's more complex, I realize, but anyway, I'm glad to see that there's some momentum there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Katrina, for your presentation. I wanted to hear a little bit more crisis stabilization with UNM, and we've had some conversations. Can you say a little bit what you believe the city's role could be in that important piece in the continuum? Because I know we agree on the continuum, the housing, the back door, but what you see the city's role could be in that crisis stabilization piece?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Dr. Pierce. I think there's room for everybody at the table. That's really what the answer is. I think what we were trying to do is really get a start on a scope of service that we knew that we could work with the UNM on implementing. So there's a couple of things that I think that we could do. One, we're talking about a small build out over at the Marble Center and doing some services, and it's really that service component that we need. Right now, when we're talking about these short phases, it's not a capital investment, it's a service investment, and we're talking about expansion of a living room model, expansion of observation, and also working with the state on partial hospitalization regs. So that in and of itself, there's going to be sort of this braided funding piece, but we're really talking about what can they do in terms of operations immediately on that campus that would support that crisis continuum. And I think that there's a role for everybody there in terms of that. But in this initial phase, we believe, at least from our initial conversations with UNM, that they would be able to pay for that small build out on Marble. The next piece that would happen at the MATS campus is that we're still a bit in limbo in terms of our tenants who are at who are sharing space with us there. They may be moving out in a wing, or they may be moving out bigger than that. So we're still in negotiations on that. So that's why I'm kind of vague on it, because we don't know what space we have. So we don't know if there's any sort of capital need or not. That just evolved last week. Yes. And that third phase is really that long-term phase, which we had, kind of pushed out to 2022 in terms of that building piece. And we are just engaging in the conversations with UNM, just one conversation, to say, we would like to be part of the planning, the building, the design, because we are interested in the investment. But I think really the critical piece to get down first is the services that we want to provide, and then we're trying to figure out where do we need to go? Who do we need to talk to? And then who has skin in the game that we want to start partnering with? So we have met between just UNM preliminarily and the county to talk about really the service delivery. And then, what do we need to provide based on the guidance with Hayden Associates, and what do we want to do? And then do we build out, do we not? And then what are the operational investments, if any, that we have to apply in order to operate this? I know it's still a little vague. It's Jell-O. It just got in the refrigerator. So I think that there's time to kind of mold this whole thing up. But really, we've been talking more about services. And then I think the what next is, are there capital pieces and operational pieces that we need to put together, and who does it? Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Counselor Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I had a meeting last week with Mayor Keller, and one of his priorities is also the crisis resource stabilization triage that we want to build here in Albuquerque. And I know you're moving the time frame back a little bit. It's my priority, his priority, and I think the priority of this board that we move as quickly as possible on this because of the importance of this issue. And I also want to thank Councilor Benton for his leadership in the single-family housing unit for the homeless that the council voted on just this week. I think that's going to be a critical component. And speaking to people that have been to San Antonio, they were also stating that, we're looking at the San Antonio model, but I also think that we should look at the Salt Lake City model. I think they've done a tremendous job in dealing with the homeless population in Salt Lake, because we're looking at the cost of building that type of center at $100 million, as Councilor Benton was saying. And I know we don't have that kind of money, so I think we're moving in the right direction with what we've done to this point. But I think we must continue to work towards that stabilization center, because the combination, like you say, it's just a combination of a lot of different moving parts that need to work together. And I was concerned about a year and a half ago, the Albuquerque Journal wrote a really negative editorial on the money just sitting in the bank and we weren't using the money. I would like to see members of this board, and maybe yourself, to go down to the editorial board and let them know, and maybe some of the members of the task force, what has been done to this point. Because I think it's important that the public knows that their tax dollars are being spent wisely. And we need to let the public know that's going on, because that editorial that was put out a while back, there was never any retractions stating what we've done. But I think we've taken some great strides in making this situation much, much better than what it was 2 years ago. So I would appreciate we can get a committee together to do that.
Madam Chair, Councilman, I want to let you know that we're working on our annual report right now and gathering data to do just that. Not that we would go to the editorial board, but we'd be able to present it to this body and to the county commission in order to have that information, not only to disseminate to the community, because it's really important, it's the most important for the community to know, but if we needed to talk to the Journal, or there are members that wanted to talk to the Journal, they'd have the statistics and facts to do that.
And I would hope that would be the case. I mean, we should make sure.
Give us a month or two, I'm sorry.
This is one venue and one avenue that we can get the information out to the public. If it's through the Albuquerque Journal, we need to do so.
Thank you.
Commissioner O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think one of the difficulties is the communication issue, and I'm just going to put it out there, because if we're going to have a partnership, we need to have people at the table who can make decisions about this. And that's what I think we're lacking. And I don't know if this committee needs to assign some people that can make these decisions, because I keep hearing what people want to do. For example, the mayor wants to do something. Okay, well, we don't know about it. We're not being told what it is. We're not being told what we're supposed to contribute to this, or vice versa. There isn't very good communication. And I know that we're different in the sense that we're structured differently as a commission versus a city because of the mayor and the council, but council makes decisions on how things get funded. It's going to be really important to have those discussions, and so far we haven't had them. I think they've just been sort of on the periphery, and then all of a sudden we're like, well, surprised that maybe some of these ideas are coming to the fore, and what is our role in it? Because ultimately we have to make those decisions. So there has to be a commitment from decision makers about how we want to move forward if we want to have a partnership.
Yes.
Because the obligation is on the county to move forward with some of these initiatives, and sometimes, we've just done it solo because we have to get this money out. So I think that's one of the things that's lacking, is there's these ideas out there, but we're not, I haven't been approached about some of these things. I don't know what this is. I don't know what this means. So if we can, figure out how to do that, that would be helpful, so that we're not just talking in circles.
Well, yes, and thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner. I'd also like to say that I think that there's plenty of work for all of us. So we talk about, public, just in the realm of public safety. And in the realm of public safety, we talk a lot about homelessness, and we talk a lot about mental health, and we talk a lot about addiction. And that's on a long pendulum and a long scale that we all have work that we could do. And I agree. I know Dr. Pierce agrees that we are working very, very, very closely together. But if we could have decision makers help us decide, does it make sense for the city to push the initiative for homelessness, and then how does that intersect with behavioral health so that we can then get people access into services? And does it make sense for us to really work on that crisis triage piece so that we're working with the university, of course with input from the city, but we fund that, and that we are looking at that, and then how does that piece intersect back to homelessness and back to services that we could relate to? So there's plenty of work on the table that deals with the cross-sector population that we're dealing with, but we need to identify that the county is committed to behavioral health, and we are committed to moving forward on a crisis system. Does this mean that the city wants to put effort into the homeless initiative and housing that piece, and then we work together on those intersections?
Any other questions? No? Well, I just want to add, Katrina, I just think you guys are doing some really great work. Obviously, we have Dr. Pierce here now, so she can communicate what the interests of the mayor is or are. But I just wanted to kind of go back to, we're talking about the front door, and we're talking about the back door, and we're talking about housing, and we're talking about this whole continuum of care. And this is like, how do you eat an elephant, right? I think I've said that before, one bite of it at a time. For me, one of my concerns is that, as we're talking about housing and just kind of knowing and having experience with some of these issues, is that how do we get somebody to the gate that wants to even go to the front door? And that's a huge challenge. So we can have all the houses and all the other stuff that we're doing, but if we can't really get people the treatment that they need, and this is all for nothing. So in my experience, it's really knowing that how do we get folks who even want the treatment but know that they can't commit to it, right? And I know we can't institutionalize people. I understand that, of course. I don't support anything like that. But really, there's got to be a point where we look at someone who goes in and really they're in their time of need and they want the treatment, that maybe there's this kind of court-ordered treatment that they can kind of maybe voluntarily sign up for so that they can get past that hurdle that they need to get past. And then another option could be is how do we get them the medication they need to get over that hurdle? Because as you know, many times when people go in to seek treatment, they go in and they rest a little bit and then they're back out. So we'll never get to beyond that front door if we can't get people in the door. So if you can talk to me a little bit about some of those options, because that's something that I'm very interested in.
Absolutely. Madam Chair, first of all, I need to say that the City of Albuquerque is doing a phenomenal job with the University of New Mexico Hospital and District Court in order to implement assisted outpatient treatment. So in this administration, well, in the prior administration, it was a priority to fund assisted outpatient treatment, and the city has taken it on themselves to pilot a project to focus on individuals that are at the University of New Mexico Hospital that would benefit from AOT, which is basically court-mandated outpatient treatment. In addition to that, I'm going to steal your thunder, Dr. Pierce, but I heard through the grapevine that they actually might get some funding from this federally because they applied for a grant, did an outstanding job, and out of all the entities that applied, tied, they came in fourth, and they funded the top three. Now they have a little bit extra money. It looks like they're going to be funding the fourth. That is fantastic news in the piece of the behavioral health continuum that we need. So know that that's there. Also know that when we talk about these things and assisted outpatient treatment, there are some jurisdictions, such as Tucson, that have a very robust model that you can get somebody into assisted outpatient treatment who's also having some self-neglect issues. That is not what our AOT model that was passed and signed by the governor says for us here, but it's a good starting point for us to figure out where we're going, what the pitfalls are, and if we need to do more advocacy through this body to do more. I think the second thing and the real challenge is getting one of our major providers, which is me, in terms of detox, to start really looking and implementing medication-assisted treatment upon coming in the door when you're detoxing. And so because what we're doing now is we're giving medication, but it's not Suboxone, it's not methadone, it's not something that would really ease that client when they're coming in the door and make them want to stay for more than an hour or 2 hours and want that fix. And so we have been working diligently with the Addiction Treatment Advisory Board, which is a board that guides the county into best practices on implementing that model, induction and maintenance on our MATS campus. And so I will provide an update at the next meeting about how that's going, because even though it's not on the behavioral health tax, it's part of the behavioral health continuum that we all need to talk about. So I should have a little bit more of an update, and I will get this body the standards that they just, standards of care that they just implemented and approved on Monday. And so that you can see what the treatment standards are and the direction that they're asking us to go in terms of medication-assisted treatment.
So, Katrina, so do you have any data in terms of people who have had the medicated-assisted treatment in success rather than not? Because, you know, I know that it becomes a revolving door, right? People actually want the help, but they just can't. The urge just doesn't allow them to stay there long enough to.
Great question, Madam Chair. I don't have it, but we have phenomenal doctors on that advisory board, including a doctor by the name of Bruce Trigg, who has any piece of data that you ever wanted. It'll actually put you to sleep sometime. But I'm sure he will be able to pull together data not only on any sort of success upon the time of arrival, induction for detox purposes, but how well maintenance is doing. So we can get that for you, or something like it, cobbled something together.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Katrina. And I don't know if you want to stay up here, but I think the rest of the agenda items are related to you. So the opportunity, the new committee members, if there's committee members here that are existing and new committee members, if you want to come up and say a few words, I think our next item is to vote on the new committee members, correct?
Yes.
So.
But we do have an update from our Supportive Housing Committee.
Okay.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners and Councilors. On your agenda tonight is our proposal from the Supportive Housing Subcommittee. I'm Sister Agnes, and I'm the Vice Chair of this subcommittee. One of the most important on this is that when someone's coming out of treatment, part of their treatment plan mandated is housing. So this transitional housing vouchers, short-term, 2 months, and it's our target population are those who completed a 28-day treatment program in our community and are in need of housing that supports the treatment. Their need for safe, secure, and stable housing is part of the treatment road to recovery, and it's part of the housing continuum that we have heard about in many meetings in this chamber. Another solution to the housing continuum is this for those who are seeking a better quality of life. It's also important to know that we are asking for $1 million, one-time only expense, to use for this targeted population and either within a year or when it's used up. But for anyone who's going for treatment, they have to have a stable place. And we know when you come out of jail or a hospital and you have to go back home to where there's violence, abuse, and drugs, your treatment program is in jeopardy. And that is part of the population that I think we are talking about too, that are in this crisis mode in the city.
Thank you. And I think we have a couple of committee members coming up. You're fine.
It's just amazing when you know that stuff. I'm Robin Connell on Community Supports, and Madam Chair and Commissioner O'Malley, we have worked out the communication. We had communication glitches. It seemed like every time we would bump up on a communication glitch. But I want to tell you, after 3 years, we've got it. We've got an answer to it, and we've got people working on it, and there's life in the committees that are saying, okay, we really can do this, and they really are hearing, and I'm hard of hearing, so I don't get a lot of it, but you know, I'm there to bring it forward. And I think it's important that we get the communication and we get the people at the table and the decision makers. And so I think the committees, we're calling ourselves advisory, we're subcommittees. But when we think about that, then it's to go back to the community. I'm part of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I go back to that community and say, this is what we do. I'm part of St. Therese on 4th Street. I go back to that community and say what's happening, so that when people see something in the journal that we're not doing anything, they speak up and say, no, that's not right. So we have the communication starting, but it's with people without names. You know, we're not like public figures, but we're getting the word out there. So I think we'll get a different journal article about what's going on and how the money, Councilman Sanchez, how things are being spent, because the people will know.
Excuse me, Commissioner O'Malley has a question.
Just real quick, I don't have an issue with the way the subcommittees are communicating. I think you all are doing a great job. I think, though, that when we're trying to implement some of these big things, except, and we were referring to a crisis triage center or something, working out who's doing what, moving forward with an idea, we need to I think we have to have better communication in the decision maker realm. That's really what I was talking about. But I think you all are doing a great job, and I appreciate your volunteerism. I know you're volunteering for it. I live very close to St. Therese, by the way. Thank you. I thank you for your work.
Thank you for yours too.
Any other questions? Oh, we have another committee member.
Hi, good evening. My name is Juniper Decker, and I'm a volunteer. I'm a technical advisor for the Prevention and Harm Reduction Subcommittee, and I just wanted to introduce myself. Thank you.
New member.
Yeah. Welcome. And then, of course, we have some additional committee members there in the back. Hello, thank you for your service. So the next item we have is approval of the Behavioral Health Subcommittee members. Do I have a motion? There's a motion and a second. Oh. Oh. Sorry about that. We need the commissioner. We can vote this against one. Is he on the phone?
Yes.
Hello, Commissioner.
Hi, how are you?
We are on approval of the Behavioral Health Subcommittee members. We have several people here in the audience who are existing members and newcomers to the committees. So I think right now we have a motion and a second to approve. All those in favor say yes?
I can barely hear.
Just say yes.
They said just say yes. There's a motion and a second to approve the new committee members. There's about 20 of them.
I got you. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so motion approved. So next item is we have the one-time expense in funding for transitional housing vouchers. I don't know, Katrina, you talked about it, but I don't know if you want to, and
Just in brief, it's two components. It's $1 million total, and we want to study this population a little bit more to see how well this money is being spent, but it's really for two purposes. One, for sober living for a max of 2-month period of time for individuals who have gone through treatment. We know that we have a lot of sober living beds, but it's self and private pay. So we want to be able to afford this for the next step so people don't regress. And the other portion of that will go to motel vouchers for a maximum of 2 weeks so that we have individuals that we can catch and connect with services before they go on to a program.
I move for approval.
Second.
there's a motion and a second for approval of the transitional housing vouchers. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion passes. Next, other business. Does anyone have any other business? Well, next item is next meeting. So September 27th, 2018 at 5 p.m. in these chambers. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.